In this video, I'm going to show you how to install Certainteed Swiftstart starter shingles. There's a few important reasons why we install starter shingles. Number one, it helps for wind uplift. Number two, it protects water getting in between the butt joints of your first shingle. And number three, for better manufacturer warranties, most manufacturers recommend or require that starter shingle is installed, and it's required that the brand of starter shingles matches the brand of the shingles. That's why I always recommend having a coherent roof. Usually, starter shingles are pretty simple to install and kind of the concepts remain the same. However, I think every single component of the roof should be installed per manufacturer specifications. The first thing they require, which is pretty common, is cutting the edge off the starter shingle to make sure that the butt joints don't align. Most starter shingles, usually they come attached and you just break them apart, and then you have two pieces of starter shingles. The first thing that I can notice on the CertainTeed starter shingle is the adhesive is quite low compared to OCJF. They usually have one solid strip. This is dabbed in between, but it'll probably do the job for us. The dabs of adhesive is going to be on your outside edge, regardless of whether it's a rake or an eave. This is going to be outside right here. CertainTeed calls for the overhang of the shingle to be 3/4 out from the eave and 1/2 inch out from the rakes. I usually recommend anywhere from 1/2 inch to 3/4, so it's pretty much the same concept along with the rest of the manufacturers. What you want to be sure of before installing a starter shingle is the first starter shingle you install should be shorter and leave a gap between the shingle and the starter shingle itself. So let's say this is the shingle that you're going to be installing. You can see if we install the shingle and the starter shingle full piece each, we're going to only have a 1/2 inch gap. What CertainTeed wants and what most manufacturers want is a minimum of 3.5 inches. I'm going to say let's go a little bit more. Let's leave about 4 or 5 inches. So we're going to be cutting this much, about 4 or 5 inches off the edge of our starter shingle, and we're going to be using a regular utility knife. The same way you cut your shingles is the same way we're going to cut our starter strip. We can use this as a guide, score it, and usually we just, now we cut 5 inches off. That's going to be very important. I'll show you why in a little bit, but we can take this to our roof and start installing. So like I said, CertainTeed requires a 3/4 inch overlap. Anywhere from 1/2 inch to 3/4 will work. It's really a personal preference. I usually like using my index finger. I think it's about probably 5/8 of an inch, so you can see using the index finger to align it. You want to put in one nail about 2 inches from the edge. Anytime you're nailing any shingle or asphalt component, one thing you want to make sure is not to overdrive the nail. This nail right here is slightly overdriven. You can see it's pushing the shingle in a little bit too much. You usually want it to be flush, so that requires an adjustment on your gun. Now that we've got one side nailed, I'm going to use that nail as a pivot point. Align the other side to where we want it, and it's perfect right there. You can see it's just flush with the top of the shingle. Now CertainTeed calls for a nail to be placed every 10 to 12 inches. Obviously, depending on how much you cut it, that's gonna vary a little bit. I would recommend eyeballing it. If you have a relatively good eye, you can just space that out 10, 12 inches. Once we have our first starter shingle in place, we can continue with the rest of them without cutting them, just using full strips. Now the importance of cutting that first shingle is going to be when we install our first row of shingles. As you can see, here's where our joint lands. I'm going to install another shingle right next to it to show you the importance of that. This is just a temporary installation, so I don't care where that nail falls. So I've got two shingles right here. I've definitely exaggerated this butt joint gap. Usually this gap is a lot smaller, but what I want to show is regardless of how tight this gap is, there's always going to be water that's going in between these two shingles. So if you don't have a starter shingle behind here, your water's going to get straight onto the underlayment and will eventually cause a leak. Now the importance of cutting that first starter strip is going to be the spacing between this joint and the joint between our shingles. The last thing we want to do is for these joints to align and have water go in between here. It'll completely eliminate one of the three big purposes of this starter strip. The same thing, we don't want to have a nail right here. So you can see either way, we've got about a 3 to 4 inch space between our butt joint and our nail, which makes for perfect alignment. And moving forward, we're going to have a great overlap and a great waterproofing on first row, then it'll continue up from there. Guys, thanks for watching. I have a video on the importance of starter strips. If you're not convinced that you need one, please watch that. You'll be convinced right away.